My name is Evelyn Halstead, and for 37 years, I served this country in silence, in shadow, and in strength. I led combat units across oceans, sat in intelligence briefings that never saw the light of day, and earned 4 stars across the course of a life no one outside the military ever truly understood. I was one of the first women to rise to command within a field still run by men who once scoffed at my very presence. But nothing in my years of service prepared me for what came after. Not war. Not espionage. Not enemy fire. No, the real ambush came from my own son. It was the night of my 61st birthday. My first since retirement. The living room was quiet, the candles on my modest cake flickering against the dim light. My son Derek and his wife Ally had come with their 2 boys, mostly out of obligation. The kids were more interested in their tablets. Ally kept glancing at her phone. And Derek couldn't even look me in the eye. "You didn't have to come," I had told him when he showed up late. He shrugged. Well, we were in the area. The words stung more than I expected. He lived 20 minutes away. After dinner, the boys ran upstairs. Ally went out to take a call, and I found myself alone with my only child, the one I'd raised alone when his father passed away before Derek's 3rd birthday. I poured him a glass of bourbon. The same kind his father once drank. "You look tired, Mom," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I gave a dry smile. "I just turned 61. I'm entitled." He laughed, but it wasn't kind. "Guess that's true. You're not exactly active duty material anymore." I looked at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged again, dismissive. "I mean, come on. You're not General Halstead now. You're just Mom. An old woman, really." The words hit like a rifle, but to the gut. Just Mom. Just an old woman. I had faced down foreign dignitaries, reviewed counter-terror operations, and led entire bases. And yet, here in my own living room, my own son couldn't see anything beyond a birthday cake and wrinkles. He didn't say it to hurt me, I don't think. But sometimes, what cuts the deepest isn't meant to wound. It's just said because the other person stopped seeing you clearly long ago. He finished his drink, patted me on the shoulder like I was a frail volunteer, and said, "You should really think about downsizing, by the way. Big house like this. It's kind of a lot, don't you think?" He didn't stay for dessert. That night, I sat alone in the same chair I used to nurse him in. I looked around at the military awards still boxed from my retirement ceremony. I hadn't even hung them. Why bother? Derek had barely come to the ceremony. Left before the reception. He didn't see a general when he looked at me. He saw a burden. A relic. A woman out of place in the world he now claimed as his own. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. I had given him space for years, let him believe he was the one carving a legacy, even though mine had been laid in steel and sand and blood. But something shifted that night. If he wanted to see what an old woman was capable of, he was about to find out. 2 weeks after that birthday evening, I received a thick envelope in the mail, no return address, just my name typed neatly across the front in all caps, Evelyn M. Halstead. Inside, a letter. Stiff paper. Legal tone. My house had been appraised. Not requested. Not discussed. Just appraised. And at the bottom of the letter, a small, handwritten note, not from the bank, not from an official, but from Derek. "Mom, I had a friend do a preliminary value assessment on the property. We're just trying to help get ahead of things, estate planning, long-term care, that sort of thing. We'll talk soon. Love, D." Estate planning? I wasn't dead. Long-term care? I could still do push-ups, probably more than he could. That weekend, he and Ally came over unannounced. They brought bagels, like it was some kind of peace offering. "We've been thinking," Derek began, sitting across from me at the breakfast table like a lawyer about to deliver a verdict. "It's probably time we look at next steps." "Next steps?" I asked, watching the cream cheese on his bagel crack as he pressed it too hard. "For who?" "For you," Ally chimed in. "There's this amazing community, Silver Pines. It's beautiful. Near a walking trail. Very, social. Social. As if I were some dusty spinster in need of a book club and shuffleboard. "I'm not going anywhere," I said flatly. "I like my home." Derek sighed. You're alone here, Mom. This place is too big. It's not safe. What if something happens? Like what? I asked. A hostile ambush in the garden? I have 4 years of field command experience in war zones. I think I can manage the kitchen stairs. He didn't laugh. We just want what's best for you, Ally offered, her voice syrupy sweet, like she was talking to a confused aunt at a family reunion. They didn't see me, not really. They saw a liability. A piece of property sitting on 2 acres of desirable land just 10 minutes from the city center. A house filled with equity. A name they thought would fade easily from the deed with time and gentle suggestion. I'm fine, I said calmly. And I'm staying. Derek looked disappointed. Not surprised. Just mildly irritated that I hadn't gone along with their plan. That was when he stood and casually dropped his next move. Well, it doesn't have to be today, he said. But the VA called. Your benefits need to be reviewed again. Might affect the supplemental. I submitted the paperwork to shift your file to my name as power of attorney. Just in case. I felt my blood go cold. You what? It's standard. They need someone on record, and you've never filled out that part. Don't worry, it's not binding yet. I stood then. Slow. Steady. Derek, did I give you permission to touch my file? He blinked, surprised by the shift in my tone. Mom, it's just a safeguard. No, it's a presumption, I snapped. And a dangerous one. They left shortly after. No hugs. No apologies. Just a muttered, we'll circle back later. But I already knew there would be no circling back. That night, I unlocked the footlocker I hadn't opened since the day I hung up my uniform. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas and the smell of a life few ever fully understood, was my final commendation, the letter signed by a 3-star general recognizing my last command at Redstone Air Logistics Base. My boots, my campaign pins, my retirement flag, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope I had almost forgotten about. My standing invitation to return as a civilian consultant, issued directly from the Pentagon. I had filed it away, telling myself I'd earned rest, that I had no reason to go back. But now I had a reason. The envelope had yellowed slightly at the edges, though the seal remained unbroken, embossed with the unmistakable crest of the United States Department of Defense. My name, typed in black ink beneath the fold, had faded only a little. It was dated 16 months before my retirement ceremony, issued after my final assessment briefing with Joint Command. At the time, it had been labeled a courtesy gesture, a formality extended to decorated generals in good standing. But I knew what it really was. A door. One I had never stepped through. Not until now. That Sunday, I ironed a crisp navy blouse and pulled my hair into the same tight bun I used to wear beneath my dress cap. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying the woman staring back at me. My face was older, yes, but the fire in my eyes? Untouched. The base at Fort Newcastle, just over an hour from Ashfield, still ran active command rotations. It was a mid-level logistics hub, but critical for airlift operations and drone surveillance coordination. The kind of place where operations continued quietly but decisively. I had served there 3 times in my career, once as a deputy commander. And now I would return. The gates looked the same, tall, unmoving, dignified. The young guard at the checkpoint gave me a once-over and nodded politely. Ma'am, ID please. I handed him both, my DoD civilian consultant badge and my retired general's ID. His eyes widened. General Halstead. Retired, I corrected with a calm smile. Of course. Welcome back, ma'am. He didn't hesitate to wave me through. Some salutes don't come from orders. They come from memory. Inside the main administrative building, I met with Base Commander Colonel Miles Harland, a man 20 years my junior, but sharp, respectful, and the kind who knew how to listen before he spoke. General Halstead, he said, standing to shake my hand, I can't tell you what a surprise this is. We've always got room for a mind like yours. I'm not here to relive the glory days, Colonel, I said. I'm here because I have something to offer. And I need to remember that I still can. He nodded once. We've been short on strategic planners for the Emerging Logistics Task Force. The spot's yours if you want it. I want it, I said without hesitation. By the end of that meeting, I was assigned to the civilian consulting team overseeing air mobility logistics for the Northeastern region, a role that would place me right back in the center of operational planning, oversight, and advisement. But more than that, it would place me exactly where I needed to be, in control of my own narrative again. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I wasn't doing it to prove Derek wrong. I was doing it to remember the parts of myself that motherhood, grief, and forced retirement had slowly dulled, the parts that once knew how to stand in front of a situation and say, "I've got this." That evening, I walked across the tarmac behind the hangars as the sun dipped low behind the mountains. Aircraft moved in silence. Shadows stretched like ribbons across the asphalt. And I stood there for a long time, not as a guest, not as a mother, not as a woman someone called too old, but as General Evelyn Halstead, no prefix required. Derek hadn't called in days. Not since our last conversation, when I made it clear I didn't need saving, especially not by someone holding secret appraisals behind my back. It was unlike him in a way. Usually, when things didn't go his way, he doubled down, more texts, more unsolicited articles about aging parents and estate taxes. But now, silence. I figured he'd assumed I was cooling off in anger, or maybe sulking like he expected a woman my age to do. He probably imagined I was home watching daytime talk shows and clipping coupons while trying to make sense of my Medicare packet. What he didn't know was that I was back on base. By the middle of my second week at Fort Newcastle, I was leading logistics briefings again. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. The room still respected rank, even if mine no longer carried the active title. Young officers took notes when I spoke. Commanders asked questions. I saw that old glimmer, the one that said, "She still has it," flash across their faces. One morning, Colonel Harland stepped into the planning room holding a thick binder. "We've been selected for the regional simulation drill," he said. "They want a public-facing statement. Something that shows leadership continuity during your advisory term." He glanced at me. "We'd like you to give the opening briefing, General." That was how it happened. The very next day, the Department of Defense published a press release. It was standard, just a paragraph or two, an announcement of the annual readiness initiative. But buried in the third line, in small but unmistakable type, were the words, "Led by retired General Evelyn Halstead, currently serving as Senior Civilian Logistics Consultant at Fort Newcastle." It wasn't meant to be a headline, but it became one. The Military Veterans News blog picked it up first. Then a local station that remembered my name from old 4th of July parades. By the time it made it to a national defense newsletter, it was titled, "Veteran Female General Returns to Strategic Command at 61. Her Mind is Still a Weapon." Derek called the next morning. I didn't answer. He tried again that evening, then texted. "Saw the article. You didn't say anything. Why would you go back? Are you okay?" No apology. No self-awareness. Just confusion, as if I had somehow owed him the courtesy of warning him before I stepped back into a life he'd already buried. I let the message sit unread. That Friday, I was scheduled to deliver the opening remarks for the drill. The small auditorium was packed senior officers, civilian analysts, support staff. The air buzzed with quiet energy, a mix of protocol and anticipation. When I walked onto the stage, I didn't wear my old uniform. I wore a simple navy blazer, my insignia on a small lapel pin. As I approached the podium, Colonel Harland turned toward the audience and spoke clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the command table, General Halstead." The applause was respectful, steady. But what caught my attention wasn't the clapping. It was the presence of a familiar figure in the back row, just outside the spotlight. Derek. He stood frozen, lips slightly parted, watching as a room of decorated military leaders, men and women who had never met me before, rose to their feet out of sheer respect. They weren't clapping for someone's mother. They were clapping for a commander. And for the first time in his life, my son saw it. All of it. The weight. The legacy. The truth. I delivered the briefing like I always had, clear, strategic, firm. I didn't look at him once. Because that moment wasn't about him. It was about me. 3 days passed after the briefing. 3 quiet, deliberate days where I didn't return Derek's calls, didn't reply to his texts, didn't break the rhythm I'd found again, the rhythm of purpose, of early mornings on base, of strategy meetings where people still leaned in when I spoke. Then, on a cool Monday afternoon, just as I was locking up my car in the lot behind the bakery I now called home, I turned to find him standing on the sidewalk. Derek. Alone. Hands in his pockets. Dressed in a simple flannel and jeans. No suit. No smug posture. Just a son, trying to figure out who his mother had become. "Hi," he said softly, like he was unsure if the greeting was still his to offer. I gave a nod, but didn't invite him in. He looked around, then down at his shoes. "I was wondering if you'd maybe join me for dinner? Nothing fancy. Just talk." The old me might have said yes immediately. Out of hope. Out of habit. But the woman standing on that sidewalk had grown new roots since the roadside drop-off. And she no longer accepted half-efforts in the name of family. "Why no?" I asked calmly. Derek didn't flinch. "Because I watched an entire room of people stand for you. And I realized. I never did." We met that evening at a quiet bistro near the edge of town, neutral ground, someplace neither of us had memories tethered to. No birthdays. No arguments. No ghosts. Just 2 adults. Mother and son. We ordered. Saturday. Stirred our drinks in silence for a bit longer than was comfortable. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't tell me you were going back." "You didn't ask if I still could," I replied. He winced. "I deserve that," he said. "You deserve the truth," I said. "The same way I did when you filed paperwork behind my back." His shoulders slumped. That was Ally's idea. But I went along with it. I thought you were done. Done with what? Living. I didn't mean it like that. You did, I said plainly. You just didn't know it yet. We sat in silence again, but this time, it felt like something was shifting. Breaking down. Maybe rebuilding. "I forgot who you were before you were just mom," he said finally. "And I resented that you were bigger than I ever knew how to be." That landed heavier than I expected. Honest words always do. "I never needed you to be proud of me," I said. "But I did hope you'd remember who raised you. And why I did it alone." Derek swallowed hard. "I was so sure I had you figured out," he said. "And then I saw that room rise for you, and I realized. I didn't know the first thing. The food arrived. We didn't touch it right away." He reached into his coat pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "What's this?" I called the VA, revoked the application. No power of attorney. No estate changes. "It's done." I stared at the paper but didn't pick it up. "You shouldn't have filed it to begin with," I said. "I know. But thank you." He nodded slowly. I don't want to lose you without ever really knowing you." I met his eyes. "Then start here. As my son, not my handler." We talked for another hour. About real things. My deployments. His fears. His boys. My regrets. And when we finally left, I realized something unexpected. Forgiveness wasn't a thunderclap. It was a slow, steady rain. One honest conversation at a time. That night, I sat in bed and unfolded the Pentagon letter again. The one that brought me back. I thought of all the years I had erased myself to become what Derek needed. And how, in doing so, I had let him forget I had ever been more. But now he knew. Not because I told him, but because he saw it with his own eyes. Respect. Command. Legacy. 3 things that didn't die with my rank. It's strange how long a uniform can stay folded before it starts to haunt you. Mine had been tucked away in a cedar-lined box for over a year, untouched, pressed, perfect. A museum piece in my own closet. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I believed I had moved on. Turns out, I had only been waiting to remember what it felt like to stand straight again. Now, every morning, I hung it outside my closet door as a quiet reminder. Your strength was never retired. Only shelved. Temporarily. The days at Fort Newcastle rolled forward with rhythm. Morning briefings, drill preparation, mentorship sessions with young officers. I wasn't running laps or crawling through obstacle courses anymore, but I was building something even stronger, respect from a new generation. And for the first time in years, I felt necessary. Not because someone else needed me, but because I needed me. One afternoon, I was asked to lead a workshop on operational resilience, a fancy term for what to do when the plan fails and no one is coming to save you. I stood before a dozen wide-eyed second lieutenants, all of them barely into their 30s. I know what some of you are thinking, I said with a slight smile. What can a retired general teach us that YouTube can't? They chuckled, some uncomfortably. Let me tell you something, I continued. War doesn't care how shiny your bars are. Command doesn't care how fast you read a manual. And leadership? Leadership is forged in silence, under pressure, when you've run out of options and still have people looking to you. The room went still. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't just remembering who I was becoming someone new. Later that week, I got a call from the Office of Veterans Affairs, a civilian initiative inviting high-ranking retired officers to participate in a campaign called Legacy Beyond Service. A media piece. Interviews. A feature in a veterans documentary. I'd turned down a dozen of these before. I'd never liked cameras. Never thought my story needed telling. But now, something felt different. They didn't want the highlight reel. They wanted the reality, the after, the silence, the erosion, the return. I said yes. The film crew arrived the next Monday, polite, professional, efficient. They set up in my modest apartment above the bakery, asked me to wear what I'd feel most comfortable in. I chose a gray blouse and my old campaign pin. They asked me questions easy at first, then deeper. What did you lose when you retired? What surprised you the most about civilian life? What do you wish your family understood? I answered carefully, thoughtfully, until they asked the one that hit harder than expected. What did it feel like to be underestimated by your own child? I paused. Then I said, calmly, it felt like I'd gone invisible in a room I had once built with my own hands. There was no bitterness in my voice, only truth. A week later, the interview aired as part of a short online feature. It reached far more people than I expected, other veterans, widows, mothers, women who'd aged out of the spotlight but never out of their worth. One comment stayed with me. She reminds me that we don't stop being warriors just because we stop wearing the uniform. Exactly. That same evening, I received a call from Derek. No text this time. A real call. I watched it, he said, his voice soft. I didn't know half of that. You never asked, I said gently. I'm sorry. I didn't reply right away. Let him sit with the silence. Then I said, you're learning. That counts for something. He didn't ask for anything. Didn't try to explain. Just listened. Sometimes that's more than enough. I sat alone after that call, the city lights flickering outside my window. And I smiled, not because I had won anything, but because I had remembered everything. And that, at 61 years old, was the most powerful weapon I still carried. It was near the end of April when the call came from the Pentagon liaison. They were organizing a National Veterans Symposium in Washington, D.C., and they wanted me on the keynote panel, Leadership After the Uniform. I stared at the email for a long time before picking up the phone to confirm. They wanted me seated beside 3 other retired generals, 2 men, 1 woman, all younger than me. They didn't ask about my age. They didn't question if I could travel. They just said, we need your voice. It was the first time in years someone had said that without hesitation. The flight was uneventful. The arrival wasn't. As I stepped into the lobby of the conference center, dressed in navy slacks and a charcoal blazer, I felt every pair of eyes turned toward me, not because I was famous, but because I looked like I belonged. And I did. The event was being broadcast live on C-SPAN and streamed through the Department of Defense Media Network. Before the panel, they handed us each a slim headset microphone and briefed us on the talking points. But I didn't need prompts. I had lived this story, and I was finally ready to tell it. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly and approached the podium, the stage lights warm on my face. My name is Evelyn Halstead, I began. Retired general, mother, widow, soldier, and a woman who once believed her greatest service ended the day she turned in her badge. A quiet stillness settled over the room. I was wrong, I continued. You don't age out of purpose. You don't retire from who you are. You just change how you deliver it. I shared a little of what had happened, not names, not blame, Just the truth of what it felt like to be seen as used up by the very people who owed you their roots. But here's the thing, I said, letting my voice steady. Legacy doesn't fade with age. It gets louder if you let it. When I stepped down, the applause was slow at first, then full, standing, not out of politeness, out of recognition. After the event, a woman about my age approached me with tears in her eyes. My son moved me into an assisted living facility last year. Said it was for my safety. I had 26 years of service, and suddenly I was a burden. I squeezed her hand. You're not a burden, I said. You're a foundation. Don't let anyone forget that. She nodded, silently, like the words had found their way somewhere deep. When I returned to Ashfield, there was a voicemail from Derek waiting for me. Mom. I saw the panel. Watched the whole thing. I can't believe I ever made you feel like your time was over. I didn't know you were, not really. I'm just now starting to understand. It wasn't an apology. It was an awakening. And sometimes that's even better. Back at Fort Newcastle, a young lieutenant asked if I'd consider mentoring a group of women officers in training just once a week. General, we're trying to make them stronger, she said, but we need someone who knows what it takes to stay strong after they stop calling you ma'am. I said yes, not because I wanted to teach them how to lead, but because I wanted them to never forget who they are, no matter who tries to make them smaller. That night, I wrote 3 words in my journal. I still matter. And I underlined them. Twice. It had been years since I heard the sound of boots falling in perfect unison, echoing across an open tarmac under the morning sun. But that sound greeted me as I stepped out of the command building at Fort Newcastle one Friday morning. They called it an appreciation assembly. But I knew better. Colonel Harland met me just inside the gate, wearing his service dress blues. You clean up well, General, he said with a grin. I adjusted the lapel pin on my blazer. The same one from my final deployment. Not too bad for an old woman, right? He chuckled, but there was warmth in his eyes. They're waiting. The formation stretched in 3 rows. Officers, NCOs, enlisted airmen, even civilian contractors. The entire task force stood at attention. The flag behind them flapped gently in the breeze. My heels clicked softly as I approached. I didn't expect fanfare. I didn't expect music. But I did not expect what came next. Colonel Harland raised his hand. Company, he barked, present, arms. And just like that, a wall of salutes rose in my honor. Dozens of them. Sharp. Unyielding. Earned. It took everything in me not to cry. I stood silently, nodding once in return. Not in dismissal, but in recognition. These were not subordinates. These were brothers and sisters who knew that respect didn't expire with your title. Colonel Harland stepped forward again. General Halstead, he said formally, for your lifetime of service and your continuing commitment to the mission, to the people, and to the purpose of this base, we honor you, today and always. He held out a plaque. Simple bronze. Engraved with my name and service years. I took it gently, my fingers brushing across the metal. Thank you, I said, voice soft but certain. This means more than I can say. As the ceremony ended, the crowd slowly broke ranks. One by one, officers and enlisted approached me, shaking my hand, offering words I hadn't heard in years. You're the reason I stayed in after that second deployment. My mom served too. You remind me of her. Ma'am, I hope I have half your spine at 60. But what stopped me cold was the sight of someone I hadn't expected to see. Derek. Standing at the far edge of the tarmac. In a pressed shirt and slacks. Hands behind his back. Watching. Quiet. I met his eyes. He gave a faint nod, then walked slowly toward me, hesitant, unsure. He waited until the last salute was finished, until the air had cleared. I didn't know they still did this, he said. They don't, I replied. They chose to. He looked at the plaque in my hands. You really built something, he whispered. Something real. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, he finally saw me, not as the aging mother who needed managing, but as the leader who shaped lives long before she baked birthday cakes. Later that afternoon, we sat side by side in the base cafe. He stirred his coffee in silence, then asked, Why didn't you ever talk about this when I was growing up? Because I was busy raising you, I said. I wanted you to have a life separate from the uniform. But I never knew who you really were. I gave him a tired smile. Then maybe this is your time to find out. We didn't talk much more after that. We didn't need to. Respect isn't built in words. It's built in seeing someone clearly for the very first time. Legacy is a word they use often in the military. They talk about it in speeches, write it in promotions, etch it into memorial walls. But what they don't say, what I didn't fully understand until now, is that legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you choose to pass on. And who you pass it to. It was Derek who brought up the idea first. We were sitting at the picnic tables behind Fort Newcastle's admin building, where civilian staff sometimes ate lunch when the weather was good. I had brought him there for the view, not scenic really, just real. The base. The runway. The mechanics wiping grease from their hands. The kind of place that doesn't lie. Mom, he said carefully, have you ever thought about documenting it all? I looked over at him, squinting into the sun. Documenting what? Your career. Your deployments. Your command. I mean, what you've done, what you've seen. Most people don't know women were doing this kind of work back then. I wasn't the first, I said. No, he replied. But you're the only one I ever ignored. That stopped me cold. I watched him reach into his bag and pull out a notebook, leather-bound, new, uncreased. He handed it to me. I figured, maybe you'd want to start putting it down. For yourself. For the family. For those boys of mine who'll grow up and never know how strong their grandmother really was unless someone tells them. I opened the cover. Blank pages. Dozens of them. I traced a finger over the edge. That evening, I sat in my apartment, pen in hand. I thought of the years, the medals, the nights sleeping on cots in tents half a world away, the briefings that changed the trajectory of missions, and the quiet, thankless work that no press release ever covered. And I began to write. Not for fame, not for validation, but for the truth. A few weeks later, I got a call from Colonel Harland. The base wanted to name a new leadership award after me, the Evelyn Halstead Command Fellowship. It would be given annually to the top female cadet in the Regional Officer Program. I didn't say yes immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be sure it wasn't just a gesture. Only if the award is tied to mentorship, I said. I want to meet every recipient. Talk to them. Pass something on, not just be a name on a plaque. He didn't hesitate. Done. I met the first recipient that spring. Cadet Rachel Monroe, 24, whip smart, fire in her voice, questions in her eyes. She reminded me of myself before the stars on my collar, before the silence of widowhood, before motherhood tempered my edges. She asked about my toughest decision in command. I told her the truth. Letting someone else lead, I said. And not because I couldn't, but because I'd finally built something strong enough to let go of. Derek and I were still learning how to speak in the language of adults who had once misunderstood each other. He still had rough edges. Still hesitated before reaching out. But he came by more often now. Brought the boys. Sat through my long stories without looking at his phone. And once, just once, I caught him flipping through the notebook I'd begun to fill. He didn't say a word. But when he looked up, his eyes were red. Legacy, I've learned, isn't a medal. It's not in the article clippings or plaques or promotions. It's in how you leave people. What you make them believe they're capable of. And what you remind them never to forget. I was no longer General Halstead in uniform. But I was still a leader. Still a mother. Still a force. And finally, once again, still seen. Sometimes I walk past the mirror without recognizing the woman in it. Not because age has stolen her face, but because for so many years, she wasn't allowed to look back and truly see herself. Not as a mother. Not as a widow. Not even as a general. Just as Evelyn. The woman who had given everything and then stood quietly as others tried to tell her she had nothing left. But they were wrong. The military never taught me how to soften. It taught me how to endure. How to listen before acting. How to speak when silence became weakness. How to walk into a room full of doubt and still command it. And now, at 61, I finally understood the one lesson they didn't spell out in the manuals. You don't need a title to be powerful. You just need to remember who you are even when everyone else forgets. My son forgot. The system tried to forget. And for a while, so did I. But somewhere between the base ceremonies, the notebooks, and the sound of boots echoing down the tarmac, I remembered. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic revelation. But piece by piece. Like muscle memory. Derek came over the following Sunday with the boys. They ran through the hallway shouting, chasing each other with paper planes. The sound reminded me of a time long ago, when he was little, when he still thought I could fix anything. We sat on the porch later, just the two of us. "Do you think I'll ever be as strong as you?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, not the boy, not the man, but something in between. "Someone's still learning." "You already are," I said. "You just have to decide what you'll use your strength for." He nodded. "I'm trying." And this time, I believed him. That night, I opened the notebook again. Page 87. I wrote one final entry. "To anyone who's ever been called too old, too tired, or just a woman, remember this. You are more than the roles they assign you. You are history in motion. And no one gets to retire your worth but you." There was a time not long ago when I stood on the side of the road, watching the car I raised drive away without a backward glance. And I thought that was the end of something. But it was just the beginning. Because when the dust settled, when the betrayal cleared, and the uniform was folded for the last time, I was still standing. And more importantly, I was still leading. So, if anyone ever looks at you and says, "You're just an old woman now," stand taller, smile softly, and remind them gently, firmly, undeniably, I've commanded more than you'll ever understand.